So my name is Joe O'Brien. I'm the project leader of the new Athens Prescribed Fire Laboratory, located on the campus of the University of Georgia, where our Athens Forestry Sciences Lab is. Today, I'm going to just give a brief synopsis of some exciting new work that I think will be of interest to your group. It's built off of some work we've been doing to try and raise science aimed at informing prescribed fire to the level of effort that's been applied towards wildfire and wildfire suppression. So last year, we wrote a paper arguing that the science necessary to really provide critical information to guide prescribed fire and improve prescribed fire application requires a different approach. And this approach, while allied to wildland fire science in general, has both unique needs and unique opportunities. And you can read this paper. It's open access on its fire ecology. Came out last year. I can figure out how to send the link to folks. But so the theme is that there's all this effort that has been applied towards wildland fire management through the lens of suppression. But everybody talks about how prescribed fire is not only a critical ecological process, absolutely essential for maintaining most of the forested ecosystems in the United States, but it's also touted as the answer to the wildfire problem. Yet, doing some digging, it's about 5% of the effort in terms of funding and even scientific literature is devoted to prescribed fire, and we're trying to turn that around. The reason is prescribed fire has opportunities. Since we're investigating fires that haven't been lit yet, we have a much better opportunity to collect pre-fire information. A lot of times when you're trying to collect data on wildfires, which I've done, you're scrambling, you're in the way. It's not a major objective of the event. It's just difficult to collect high quality data. And oftentimes you have zero information on fire behavior, which is critical for moving prescribed fire and fire ecology into the 21st century. Prescribed fire has way different objectives that are more, I will argue, and I believe this firmly, that are more complex than wildfire management. The objective of a suppression operation is to put the fire out, maintain safety, try to protect as much property as possible. Prescribed fire has ecological objectives, fuel reduction objectives, smoke management objectives. There's a lot more going into the decisions being made to light a fire for those purposes. And obviously the techniques are different. The focus in prescribed fire is on managing ignition. And the prescribed fire manager has the ultimate control over how the fire is ignited. So when you think about how do we approach a science that's aimed at understanding the complexity of fire, and when you're talking about prescribed fire, it's even more complex, because as we see here with an aerial ignition, for example, we have multiple fire lines interacting with vegetation, fire lines interacting with wind fields that are extremely complex, and they're interacting. So up until now, I would argue that most of the guidance that people use to make decisions on how to ignite a stand to get their objectives met are based on experience. And experience is awesome, but it takes time to collect, and it often isn't helpful under changing conditions. So if your experience is built under a set of parameters, fuels that you're familiar with, weather that you're familiar with, and then Kogan grass comes, and so now your fuels are completely out of your experiential window. We're trying to build tools and information that can help you approach those problems more efficiently. As we all know, we're not getting as much acres burned as we want or need to, and part of that is because it's becoming more complex, not only in terms of landscape dynamics and more people in the landscape, but just issues like we just heard about with new invasive species, climate change, things like that. The problem is a lot of the science that built the wildfire tools is 20th century science. You know, Behave was developed in the early 1970s, and that's the foundation for a lot of our major tools like Farsight, FOFEM. All these things are built on old technology, and we can do better. I got ahead of myself. The other thing that you know, working in the Southeast chafes me is that there's this real focus on Western systems, mostly because of the wildfire issues. And, you know, they often have dramatic newsy footage of wildfires, but we do as much burning on purpose as they do by accident out in the West. And I think it's time that we recognize that we need to spend more effort on helping keep those ratios that way. And also, how do we use our information to help folks out West improve their situation? So what do we need? What's different? Because of the complexities of fire behavior in association with complex ignition patterns, we need coupled fire atmosphere models. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Coupled fire atmosphere models have feedbacks between the combustion generated heat and the atmosphere and the turbulence that's generated by that, and things like entrainment, the cool air coming in, things that prescribed fire managers manage intuitively, because the human mind is an amazing multivariate computer. When you're slowing down your ignitions from a line to a dot to a dash and manipulating widths between your ignition lines, when you're using a drip torch, you're intuitively managing the fire atmosphere interaction. The good news is that there is really complex and useful technology that is ripe, meaning it's not new, it's well understood. LIDAR, for example, it's on your phones now, it's in your cars to avoid collisions. The computational power to actually do some of this fire atmosphere modeling is now available on a desktop or a laptop. So we have the tools, we have the complexity that we need to address. And the other thing I really have been beating a drum on lately is that we keep talking about sort of national strategies or cohesive strategies, but the reality is fire behavior and fire effects are a very local phenomena, and they're based on as much variation as there is in vegetation, there's going to be as much variation in fire behavior and fire effects. So we have to kind of figure out a way that we can capture that variation and design our tools so that they can be effective at that scale. The other thing that our approach, we're using what's called a co-production model, meaning managers are integral to the science and vice versa. So we're working in teams with fire managers because we need the intuitive knowledge and the experiential sort of intuition to help us guide our science. The other good news is we've built a prescribed fire lab in Athens. We have a combustion facility that just opened about a year ago, right in the middle of COVID, but we're up and running and we're doing all kinds of experiments. We can do fire, and I'm gonna try this today. I'm gonna try to light a fire in the lab. I'm at the lab right now, but I don't know if my Wi-Fi will hold out, but good news there. Contact me. We can arrange tours when it's safe. And we're doing a bunch of active combustion research here in Athens now. We're now the equivalent of the old Macon Fire Lab. We're up and running. So why now? Enough talk. We've been talking about how prescribed fire is the answer to all the wildfire problems. We know that prescribed fire is essential to manage healthy forests. We felt like we had critical mass in terms of expertise, in terms of knowledge, and in terms of tools. So yeah, Steve Austin. The other thing is when we organized ourselves in the prescribed fire lab and this advanced technology hub that I'm going to tell you about, our commitment is to empower fire managers, from the landowner lighting a fire by himself on their property to teams of prescribed fire managers in national forests, state, whatever. What I tell folks at the national level, the fire managers, is that, we spend all this effort on providing tools to wildfire suppression, but think about how weighty a decision it is to go ignite a landscape that is not on fire. So you're taking the decision and the responsibility to start a fire usually at a landscape scale. Wouldn't you want the best possible science to back up that decision to make sure you get the best possible outcome? That's what we've been arguing. And I think the time is right. So we have some kind of lofty goals. We want to revolutionize fire behavior modeling, and we're already there. We also want to revolutionize forest inventory and monitoring so we can better fine tune our prescribed fire prescriptions to get the objectives that we want. So we need not only very complex inputs to these new fire behavior models, but the way we collect those inputs can also be very useful for sort of new next level monitoring. And of course, we want to be able to make better predictions on fire effects and fire behavior. And to do that, we're using a mechanistic approach. We look at the energy transfer from the fire to vegetation, soil, critters, whatever you want. And we try to come up with more mechanistic rather than correlative explanations of fire behavior and fire effects. So I've been through this. Right now, we're up and running. We have done some demos. Our first demo landscape was some fires that we measured on the Hitchity experimental forest in Georgia, but our plans are to move into Alabama soon at the Escambia forest and perhaps a couple of other places. But we're kind of building the bicycle as we're riding it, but we have successfully completed a demo at the Hitchity, and we're planning on putting that whole project together within the next couple of months. So the hub that we've built is national in scope, but it's heavily weighted on the east because of our intuitive understanding of prescribed fire. And our critical partners have been Los Alamos National Lab, who's helped develop the fire behavior model. Tall Timbers has been a critical partner. And of course, we've been getting buy-in from Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service Region 8. So this network is going to expand, but we've already got a really solid core of expertise to help us move forward. And our vision, our plan is an integrated approach with the core of our sort of modular predictions being built on QUIC-Fire. So QUIC-Fire is this coupled fire atmosphere model that is comprised of a fire behavior combustion model combined with a wind field model. And because of that, it can output data that's useful for predicting smoke, for predicting fire effects, for predicting fuel consumption, but it requires pretty complex inputs, which I'll get into in a minute. So QUIC-Fire requires three-dimensional inputs. And so this network, this framework, it looks complex right now, but this is just to show that we do have a vision, we do have a plan, and it's going to have two major sort of goals. One is informing QUIC-Fire, and the other is informing new monitoring. So QUIC-Fire, coupled fire atmosphere model, it works. It's in constant development, but even right now, it's shown its utility in both investigating some wildfire incidents and also looking at some things like how ignition pattern affects both fuel consumption and smoke production. So what do we mean by a coupled fire atmosphere model? QUIC is a wind model that can capture the complex turbulence and dynamics that are driven by terrain, vegetation, and heat created by the fire. The fire CA model, a cellular automata model, is what actually drives the combustion element, and they work together and they feed back onto each other. So as we all know with models, garbage in, garbage out. So to inform both the turbulence and wind field model and the fire model, we need three-dimensional representations of landscapes. And the way we get that is with a combination of airborne LIDAR. This is those little green circles are tree crowns with the red dots being the stems. We can map very accurately the three-dimensional structures of trees directly. So this is empirical data. This is not manufactured data. We can do this across entire landscapes. We can count how many individual trees there are over thousands and thousands of acres. We've done this for the Hitchity and the Piedmont National Wildlife Refuge. And then we supplement some of this with really fine scale laser scanning taken on the ground. You push a button on that instrument, 30 seconds later, you get this amazing point cloud of blades of grass and pine needles. So we take this information, grind it through some pretty complex algorithms to produce the inputs for QUIC-Fire. Now, the critical thing that you get is not only just fuels, you get interruptions in fuels and landscape features like roads that can channel wind. We've all seen this on fires. And the amazing thing about QUIC-Fire is that it can actually capture that phenomena. The way we do this, and this is a real QUIC-Fire run on the lower right of a stand out west, actually, but we take this really complicated point cloud of vegetation and convert it into voxels. And voxels are like three-dimensional pixels. So we do have to simplify things so we can actually run the computations in a timely manner. One of the great things about collecting this kind of data are some spin-offs. So this is the Hitchity, that's the Ocmulgee River. You can start seeing some things appearing in the landscape that you would never see just by stumbling through the woods. You can see features like there's this strange trench that was dug over here. Nobody knows what it is. Well, we have an archaeologist on staff who is using this LIDAR data to discover all kinds of archaeological features in the landscape that can inform past forest reconstruction. So for example, he found all these tar kilns in the coastal plain of South Carolina that were used to create naval stores back in the 1700s. Well, by understanding how much wood it takes to feed these tar kilns, we can actually start looking at what their impact was on the sort of colonial landscape in terms of the requirements to feed these kilns. Anyway, spin off. I'm like a dog looking at a squirrel here. All right, so QUIC-Fire, how is it useful to a prescribed fire manager? The most interesting things that we can get are looking at variations in ignition patterns and how that relates to both consumption, say how long it takes to complete burning or firing your unit, and then looking at alternatives and how you can tweak your ignition pattern to get the results that you want. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these simulations, but suffice it to say, we can do grid pattern ignition, we can do ring fires, we can do strip head fires, any kind of ignition that you can imagine, we can recreate with QUIC-Fire. We've also used this in a wildfire scenario, so there will be connections back to suppression. We looked at a wildfire event that happened in New Jersey, and then we started looking at what kind of management interventions could you do in this landscape to maybe minimize the size of some of these wildfires. They get a lot of them up there. So we looked at little tweaks like widening roads and how wide does a road have to be to stop a wildfire under the conditions that existed for this particular fire. And then of great interest to prescribed fire managers is smoke modeling. QUIC-Fire inherently spits out three-dimensional plume data that can be used in other smoke models like day smoke or even PB Piedmont. So we're going to have an integrated package where we have the ability for the manager to manipulate ignition patterns, see how that affects fire behavior and fire effects, but also smoke dynamics. We've also been able to use some of the modeling to show the difference between smoke production during prescribed fires versus wildfires, sort of the pay me now or pay me later kind of argument for why we need to tolerate smoke from prescribed fires. The last thing I'm going to talk about before I finish up here is all the data that's required to parameterize QUIC-Fire also has its own utility. These three-dimensional point cloud plots that in 30 seconds collect unbelievably detailed information on vegetation architecture can be used to both inventory fuels and inventory forests. And so we're working on this technique right now. How to, going out with the DBH tape, you get diameter at breast height. You go out with a terrestrial laser scanner, you get the diameter of every twig and every branch and every stem on the tree. So that's where I'm going to end right now. It's exciting times, I think, for us. I can't wait for COVID to go away so we can start hosting folks here in Athens. And I really appreciate your giving me the opportunity to speak to your group. I work for the U.S. Forest Service, so we're not tied to any particular state. So I look forward to working with you more closely in the future when things settle down, and I will stop sharing.